Good morning, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Hai Nguyen. I'm co-founder of Affluence, the company behind Prioritization. I want to let you know that this webinar is recorded, and so I'll be sharing the recording with everyone afterwards. And then also, if you have any questions during the webinar, please send a message through the chat. I'd be happy to address those questions at the end of my demo and presentation. So let's start with why Matrix. Hopefully you're here because you're interested in the software and you want to be more productive and more effective with your time. But there's three reasons why customers tend to come to Matrix. First, if you're overwhelmed with personal tasks, meetings, and emails. Or two, if you don't know what your team priorities are and you wish you had a better sense of what's going on across your team, across your organization. And three, if you feel like your organization is not always aligned on what's most important and urgent. My goals for today to help you understand the basics of Matrix, which means also the fundamental aspect of Matrix as to the why you would use the software. And then to help you become more effective and efficient at prioritizing tasks, projects, and emails, help you envision what your work and life success may look like with PM, and then learn 20% of the features in Matrix that will give you 80% of the value. There's so many capabilities inside Matrix, but the reality is you don't need to know all of them. In fact, what I want you to have a takeaway today is what are the things that you can get started right away so then you can actually start prioritizing, start understanding where you should be spending your time and effort. And then I'd like to also provide you some tips and tricks to help you prioritize better. I've talked to thousands of customers over the years. I've seen enough use cases and circumstances where I feel like there's nothing that's so unique about how you may use Matrix that someone else hasn't done before. And then hopefully you'll walk away feeling productive and having a strategy so that you can be aligned with your own team and just be able to prioritize the work that you have to do. Matrix is a comprehensive email, priority, and project management software, and we help at three different levels. The most important is the individual level, and what we do is that we help you prioritize your tasks and emails. And what it boils down to is that more so than ever before, we just have so many things on our plate, and just being able to understand where we should spend our time and effort at this moment in time is the most important thing. But here's the thing, if we can help you at the individual level and we're able to help the other individuals within your team, then we can actually help your team and all the team members be aligned on the key projects, the key initiatives, and what's really important. And then thirdly, as we help each of these teams and each of your teams and your associate teams in prioritizing your tasks, then we can actually help your organization become aligned and create a single source of truth to help everyone understand what it is that we need to work on at any point in time. And I think the important aspect of this is that Matrix also provide a history of all the changes of everything that truly matters. What makes Matrix better than many other existing solutions? It's the only software that's Microsoft 365 certified across Teams, Outlook, and web. So if you do use the Microsoft Suite, we're probably the most integrated solution within Teams, Outlook, and Copilot. Using Microsoft is not a requirement. Matrix works completely outside of the Microsoft ecosystem. We also let you prioritize emails from Gmail or any email management software. The other thing is Matrix provide also what I call people-centric collaboration. Lots of times when you use project management software, you're thinking projects, tasks, right? Or if you use the task management software, it's so focused on the things you have to do in a list. Matrix also flips all of that around and helps you understand what are the things you need to do for your fellow coworkers, for your managers, for your clients. Matrix is available as a standard SaaS solution, which is what I'll be showing today, but there's also a HIPAA compliant solution for healthcare life sciences, as well as an Azure government cloud solution for state and local government, as well, of course, enterprise deployments. Matrix provides one central place for everyone to know what needs to be done right now. And so hopefully the things I'll show you today will help you get started easily and then also provide the basic capabilities that gives you the most value. Let's start with the fundamental concept behind Matrix. So there's a quote attributed to former President Eisenhower: "What is important is seldom urgent, and what is urgent is seldom important." Now, what I really like about this quote is it helps us look at things from a different perspective. So here's a question. Imagine if you have a list of tasks, right? I asked you, write down the 15 things you have to do. Easy. You write down those 15 things. Now let me ask you a second question then. What do you do first? Do you work on the things at the top of the list or the bottom of the list? And then if you need to add something, where do you add it? Do you add it to the top of the list or the bottom of the list? And so what you find is that when we have a list, the challenge that we end up facing is that we tend to actually look at it from a list perspective, and we're prioritizing based on the last thing that's on our mind as opposed to the most important thing. So what happens is that you take that list of yours, and for every single task, you simply ask another question. Is this task important and is it urgent? And so if the answer is important and urgent, then it's in a very different bucket. If it's important but not urgent, it's another bucket. If it's not important but urgent, then it's another bucket. And if it's not important and not urgent, does it even belong on the list? And so what this is called the Eisenhower Matrix. So the idea is it's a very powerful way to prioritize your task. And what happens is you take everything you have to do and you put it into these 4 distinct buckets. And so what it does is also helps you prioritize and make the most out of your time. There's it's as simple as taking, and here's the thing. If you don't use Matrix, so let's just say after this webinar, you realize, you know what, I don't need another software to prioritize my tasks. I just want to go and just track the things I have to do on pen and paper, and that's perfectly fine. The thing is, if you go away from a list and just go to the matrix and be able to go and separate those tasks into those dimensions of importance and urgency, you'll find that when you look at this matrix and you realize, okay, you know what, this is where I can spend my time, and this is also where I should not spend my time. And that's the whole idea. So with Matrix, what we do is we take that Eisenhower matrix and we split it into these 4 buckets. So when you create a task in the Matrix software, we don't let you put it just in a list. Instead, we ask you to put into these 4 distinct buckets, right? Is it the do now? That's the important and urgent task. The do later, that's the planned quadrants. And so that's the important but not urgent. So that's what you should be spending your effort on if you don't have any fires that you're fighting. And then the things that are not important but urgent, could you delegate to somebody else? The idea is that you yourself as a manager or as an executive or even as an individual contributor, you should spend time on the things that have the biggest impact based on your specific role. And then anything else actually should be delegated to somebody else who might have a better the time, the resources, or better at executing those other things. And then lastly, instead of having anything that's not important and not urgent, you should have the inbox. And so that's where maybe things start. So that list of yours that you would create earlier, that would start in the inbox. But then from there, you start putting them into these various buckets. So here's what happens. Imagine this. Imagine if right now you go and you take a piece of paper, you do this exercise that I just mentioned, write down the 15, 20 things you have to do, put it into this matrix. Then you ask each of your coworkers to do the same thing. You ask your direct reports, you ask your managers, you ask your clients even. Then you compare notes. And that's the most interesting thing, which is vast majority of the time, right? We may all agree on the things we have to do. But what happens is that we may not agree on the order in which we should do those things. And so what happens is when you do this exercise and you have maybe 5 things in quadrant 1, and you go to your manager and your manager looks at it and say, wait a minute, I thought this was higher priority, or I don't agree with you on the things in quadrant 1 versus quadrant 2. And then vice versa, when you work with your coworkers or your direct reports, you have a sense of what's important right now, but then you look at their part of matrix and suddenly you realize that there's a lot of misalignment. So vast majority of the time, you guys might be aligned, but once in a while, you find that discrepancies on where you are not aligned, but you weren't aware. And that's the magic of Proto Matrix, because we make those priorities very, very explicit. So the 4 quadrants Eisenhower Matrix creates alignment because it forces you to prioritize from the beginning, right? You don't get to mess around and just have this list and work on it arbitrarily. Instead, you're making it explicit on what your priorities are. You can communicate those priorities to your coworkers, and your coworkers can do the same thing to you. So success from using Proto Matrix isn't about finding what everyone agrees on, because that's easy, right? That's the vast majority of the time. but it's about discovering disagreements on something that should be a priority when it isn't. And so hopefully when you think about Protomatrix and you start using the software, that you're writing things down, and the goal is for you to surface up everything that you disagree. And so the moment you find a disagreement between you and your manager, you and your direct reports, you and your customers or clients, that's when you know you're using Matrix correctly. So not so obvious, but I think that's a very key takeaway. So a couple of tips to shortcut your success. If you're a manager, then make sure that you create a project for your team, staff meetings, and screen share it. So my suggestion in general, so let's just say after you're done with this meeting, this webinar, and you go back to your seat and you start thinking about what are the things I can do to have an impact right away. If you're managing a team, create a project called Team Priorities and write down the priorities for your team. And then every time that you have a meeting with your team, your staff meeting or whatever it is, to screen share the Matrix team priority project and ensure that everyone's on the same page. And if you do that every single week, I guarantee you that you guys will be so much more effective and so much more efficient at focusing on the most important task. Because anytime that you're not working on those things in Q1 and Q2, you're wasting your effort. If you happen to manage multiple sites, so let's just say if you're an operation manager or operation director and you have multiple plants, manufacturing plants that you oversee, then you would create a different project for each of those sites or location. So the idea around using Matrix is to make sure that you have priorities for every single context. And so when I say context, it means that, you know, plant A would have its own set of priorities. Plant B would have its own set of priorities. Or customer A would have its own set of priorities, and customer B has its own set of priorities. And so the idea is that you don't mix them all together, but you create the proper context, and then Matrix can roll it up for you. If you have a training program or initiatives, then you can actually create a project in Matrix and turn that into a template for those specific guidelines. So let me give you an example. Let's just say if you have to write grants all the time, right? And you have 15 things you have to do every time you write a grant. You can create a template in Matrix, and that allows you to actually replicate your projects very seamlessly and save you time and effort. If you're a business owner, it's actually very straightforward. Create a project for each of your departments. So what that means is you have a project for marketing, a project for sales, a project for operations, finance, etc., and then have the appropriate people within each of those projects. And then lastly, if you're an individual contributor, create a project for your goals. So as you can see, Matrix is actually very flexible, and you may have a combination of these different types of projects. But one of the things I want to mention is that don't be scared of creating projects. Now, when I say projects, it means a matrix, right? Every project is a matrix. So that means that, you know, when you use Matrix, initially, you might have 3 or 5 projects in it at the start, but then over time, you can get to dozens or even hundreds of projects. I do want to mention that the webinars are recorded and then they're posted on affluence.com/webinars. And then also today's webinar is focused on the introduction to Matrix, but there's actually other topics around email management, around templates, around workload report, around Gantt charts and project management and so forth. So be sure to check out these other webinars if you're interested in that. With that, I'm now going to jump into the product and demo and both to show you the Matrix and put this into practice. So here I have my Matrix open. I happen to have the web app open here, but Matrix works inside Microsoft Teams, inside Outlook, as a desktop app on Windows, as a desktop app on Mac, on your mobile phone, etc. So Matrix is pretty much ubiquitous. No matter where you are, you can access your priorities. And I think that's a very important capability. But here I have a particular project selected, so I'll give you a sense of the structure. On the left-hand side, this is my list of projects. So earlier I mentioned how you may end up with dozens of projects. Well, each of these projects themselves represents or has a matrix associated with it, right? So here I have my personal priorities project selected, and within that I have the matrix. As you can see, I have quadrant 1, do now, do later, delegate, inbox. And so there's a typo here. I can just fix that, and you can see how I can actually change the quadrant name, customize that as needed. And then what happens is if I need to create a task, I can just simply click add item, and I can say follow up with webinar participants due tomorrow, 2 p.m. So Matrix uses what's called natural language to process my task and understand it. So if I click add here, it's going to see this due tomorrow at 2 p.m. It actually creates a due date for me tomorrow, 2 p.m. my local time. So if you're in a different time zone, Matrix will intelligently figure that out and create a due date for you. And so that's an example of a task within Matrix. The idea here is that I can go and create as many tasks as I need, or I can create what's called action items, which is the same as tasks, but maybe they're not about doing things, but about higher level strategic items. What's interesting about Matrix is that you can use it, I call it like a fractal. So what that means is that you may have a project with high level tasks, and then you can create another project with very low level tasks and link them all together. So that's something to keep in mind as you expand your usage of Matrix. Now, with the task created on the right-hand side, I have what's called the item details. This is where I can add additional information around every single task that I have. There's a couple features that I'd like you to understand and potentially use in your day-to-day. First, there's a star. So if you click on this star, what it does is it actually pushes this task to the top of the list within each of the matrix. So for me personally, I like to star something like 5 tasks or so per project, and I don't star more than that. And here's the reason. If you star everything, it's the equivalent of saying that everything is important and urgent. If everything's important and urgent, then nothing is, right? That's a key takeaway. Make sure you have that mindset in place, especially if you're a manager. You've seen it where, you have somebody who's managing a team, but like they're running around and saying, we got to do this, we got to do that, we got to do this, and everything is like now, now, now. When you do something like that, you're going to just be firefighting constantly, and it's actually not very effective at prioritizing. So when you use Matrix, keep that mindset in place as well. So when you prioritize your task, I recommend that you have no more than 20% of the tasks in quadrant 1, no more than 20% in quadrant 2, and then you have everything else in quadrant 3 and 4. And so when you move something into quadrant 1, then be sure you move something out of it, right? Or mark things as done, or move them, or reprioritize them. So now in the item details, I have that star. I can actually add some icons. I can actually assign this to another person. So if you use Matrix in the team environment, the delegation is actually a very important capability. So you can actually assign a task to other people. And then what happens is when you assign, you actually become a follower. A follower is someone who would get notifications and updates on the progress of the task. So if you're managing a team and you're delegating tasks left and right, it's pretty useful for you to know, that, okay, this task has been done, or this task is falling behind schedule, etc. Then you have progress, efforts, reminders, and due dates. Now, you saw how I said due dates. Of course, you can click on here, and then you can get access to the calendar and set, due dates, recurring dates, etc. And then the difference between due dates and reminders is actually extremely important. Let me give you an example. Let's just say if you have a task that's due next week, and it's going to take you 5 days of work to do. Well, so you're going to set a due date for next week. The problem is when that due date arrives, and if you hadn't gotten started, there's no way you get that done. So what happens is that we want to set a reminder as a way to trigger ask the system to send us a reminder, hey, let's get started on this. The other reason why reminders are so important is that it brings tasks to top of mind. As I mentioned earlier, when you write down a list of tasks, right, and you start working on things, we tend to work on the things that's last in and first out. So the way our brain works is that, when you get a spam email, a spam phone call, how do they get a hold of us? They constantly bother us, right? How many times have you received spam emails or spam phone calls from people, and they're just constantly pinging you? And guess what? You keep on thinking about them even when you don't want to. And then similarly, what happens is that we tend to be pulled away from the things that are the latest things, the most urgent things. Therefore, when you have a really important task in Matrix, I strongly recommend that you set recurring reminders, so then it becomes top of mind. And it's just a trick to fight all these other urgent things that's coming at you. So I usually do the following. At the very bottom here in the chat section, I would say remind me daily. So now when I have a very important task in Matrix, I've done 2 things. I've set a due date, I start it, well, 3 things, I guess. I start it, and then I type a recurring reminder. So now on a daily basis, I'll get a reminder to look at this task. And then even if I forget it, it's fine because Matrix will remind me again. And then here's the thing. What happens when we miss a deadline, right, is that in the regular, if you use a calendar and you write down all your tasks in calendar and you put a deadline in, and then the deadline passes, right? The deadline comes, you're thinking about it, the deadline passes, and guess what? You stop thinking about it. And then the farther you are away from the deadline, the more it's overdue and in the past, the less you're going to think about it because you have 15 other things that's coming up. So by setting these recurring reminders as well, it actually comes back up over and over again. So for me personally, I actually use recurring reminders very, very often. That's one of my most powerful trick to ensure that I work on the right things. And then when I have to follow with the customer in Matrix, I actually would create a task, and I would say due in 1 month, and I would say remind me monthly. And that is a foolproof way for me to focus on critical customers, even when I forget, and even when the due date passes, etc. So I highly recommend this. So again, the 3 features I strongly recommend that you use: the due dates, the reminders, and the starring. Don't star everything, but everything that's important should have a recurring reminder. Down here, you have a chat section. As you can see, that's where I can communicate, and I can communicate with Matrix, or I can communicate with my team members, right? So here I said, remind me daily, but also if Eugenia was in this task, she would see the comment that I send back and forth, and we can have a conversation around it. It's just like when you use a chat software like Teams or Slack or whatever, you're sending messages back and forth. The only difference is that this is within the context of the task itself. And so what happens is that when you go to a task and you have a conversation around it, guess what? You have a full history of everything that's talked about. Let me give you an example where this is important. Imagine if you and a coworker, you're brainstorming and you're coming up with all these things you're going to do. You're brainstorming with really good ideas, and you did it inside Microsoft Teams, and you had a chat and you talked about it. And then 6 months from now, you go back and say, "Hey, we talked about all these things. Do you remember the context? Do you remember what else we said?" You see how difficult it is because you might have jumped back and forth to so many different conversations. And now inside Matrix, instead, you can actually have that conversation within the context of the task. And then if you have to bring in another coworker, right? So now imagine Eugenia and I have been chatting a bunch of different things here, and now I need to bring in another person. Guess what? That person can open the Matrix item and see the full history of all the conversations, everything we've talked about, all the decisions, all the due dates, etc., without having to have access to the rest of my conversation. So it's a very trivial thing, but in reality, context matters a lot. And so I strongly encourage you to use the conversation inside Matrix to make sure that you have all the notes and all that inside the item itself. So then when someone else needs to be brought in, they get the full context. I see that someone has a question. You raise your hand. Go ahead and send it in the chat. And then at the very end of my demo, I'd be happy to answer your question. Thanks. And then now you have the note section. This is where you can add subtasks, and you can also add basic notes around the task itself. And then finally, in the resources section is where you can add additional context. So this is where you can upload files, upload documents. You can actually link Matrix tasks to each other. So what that means is I can say this task is dependent on this task, and I can add dependencies up here as part of my resources. And so Matrix actually allow you to pull in your OneDrive documents, your SharePoint, your Google Drive, or your emails from Outlook, etc., all within resources. And the idea around that is to ensure that you actually have everything within context. And again, context means that it's narrowed down and it's relevant to the things you're talking about right now. So that's how a task works in Matrix. Now, of course, there's a lot of features I'm not showing you here, but as you use Matrix, you'll learn those features and you can actually figure out what's relevant to you. But again, emphasizing that setting due dates, setting reminders as being a very crucial step. So I'm going to talk about team prioritization for a second. So for those of you who actually work in a team environment and you're having weekly or bi-weekly staff meetings, I can't emphasize this enough. This is so helpful. go ahead and create a project. So the way you do that is you go project here, create project. And when you create a project, simply go to blank project and call it team priorities. Okay. So you should do this after this call. And then when you do that, you go to here, and then you can either associate it with your entire team if you're using Protomatrix with just a few people, or you can manually invite the people who are just working with you. And then you simply click add project. And so when you do that, you actually end up creating a project such as this one, My Team Priorities. And a couple of things that I would like to recommend to you. One, after you create that project, on the right-hand side, you get what's called the project details. And in the project details, you can do a couple of things. One, you can star it. Now, when you star a project, it goes to the top of the list, just like when you star a task. And then down here, you can invite the various people to this project. So if you manage a team of 5, invite those 5 people. And then down here, you can start changing the quadrant name. So I like changing mine to high priority, medium priority, low priority, and then catch all. So as you can see, it's similar to the Eisenhower Matrix, but the naming convention could be a little bit different. And that's it. So now you have a project called Team Priorities. Then when you create a task in Matrix, just make sure that you put them in those appropriate quadrants. Here's my recommendation. Once you create My Team Priorities, as a manager, write down the priorities for your team that's relevant to this week, this quarter, this year, this month, this year. Okay. When you write those things down, prioritize them and say, by the way, these are the highest priorities, medium priorities, low priorities. Then when you have a staff meeting, don't just sit around and ask everyone to go through their, tell me what you did, right? That's a waste of time because people will say stuff that's top of mind. They're not saying stuff because it's relevant. And so instead, you can project Protomatrix onto the screen to ensure that everyone knows what the priorities are. And then when you speak about things, talk about the things in quadrant 1 first, and then talk about the things in quadrant 2. And here's the thing, if you start finding that you're talking about things in other quadrants, then maybe your priorities are off. And then that's when you reprioritize. So, I know many of you guys are probably working remotely more, or, you're not spending time in the office as much. You're not able just to see someone down the hallway and start talking to them and figure out their priorities. So having something like Matrix as a way that anyone can go into the system, take a look at my team priorities and see what my manager has said to be the most important thing is so tremendously helpful. The irony in all of this is that you don't have to use all the bells and whistles in Matrix. You don't have to go and create 15 different projects to start. Just creating a project to keep your team aligned is so tremendously helpful. So I hope that after today's call, that's one of those things that you'll do first, which is create a project for team priorities, create a project for personal priorities, and then from there, write things down. And that action of being explicit is one of the most important things you can do. Okay. So as you need to reprioritize, you can just drag and drop in Matrix. So you can see how I can actually just drag and drop very easily. And then not only that, when you have a meeting and everything's in quadrant 1, you simply resize the matrix so then you can focus on that quadrant, and then resize the matrix again to focus on the other quadrants. And then one of the things you can do as you use Matrix more is that you may end up having a lot of different tasks, and you might want to see and generate reports and so forth. Well, Matrix allows you to actually look at all your tasks in other views. So for example, I can go to the list view here and I can see all the things that's overdue. So if you have a lot of different tasks in your team projects or your personal projects, then you have things that are overdue, you can go to the list view here and then you can sort each of these columns. So just like an Excel sheet, or you can go to the Kanban view. And the Kanban view is actually really interesting. It helps you see what are the things you have to do, what are the things you have in progress, and what are the things you finish. And so the whole idea here is it's a sort of like a pipeline, right? If you have these 15 things that you're dealing with, where do they fit within the pipeline? And what's nice about this is that you can actually go to filter and you can select a person, and then you can see, okay, what are the things that Eugenia is working on that's in progress and that's been done. And so Matrix gives you this unprecedented visibility as you use the system more. And so you can actually look at it from a very low level, as in all the tasks, or you can look at a very high level. And then I can also go to the calendar view. And so, of course, if you have all your tasks that are important have due dates, then the calendar view will show that to you, and you can actually work directly from the calendar view here. You can even create tasks directly from the calendar view here. And then you have the Gantt chart view. So if you're a project manager and you're not just working with things that's due today or this week, and instead you have things that are due months or years out, Matrix Gantt chart view actually gives you that visibility across that entire time spectrum. And so if you have tasks that are dependent on each other, Matrix will draw those dependencies for you and create a visual that you can use to put in your presentation as needed. And it does that automatically. And then what happens is as you use Matrix even more over months and quarters, you can actually go to the report view and you can actually see what everyone's been working on, what quadrants they've been focusing on, right? Are you focused on quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, or 4? And so Matrix gives you that visibility automatically. One of the things I want to sort of mention here as an aside is that at the end of the day, when you use Matrix, all you're doing is create tasks and putting them into quadrants, right? That's very simple. But what happens is that as you do that day in, day out, week in, week out, and so forth, and assigning it to people, all that information is there in the background, and Matrix will surface that up later to you to help you make more decisions or just have a better understanding of what your team members are working on. So when you have a performance review, it's so easy. You can actually run those performance reports using Matrix because that information is there. And so I want you to keep that in your back of your mind too, about why it's important to get your team to invest their time and effort in using Matrix. Because if everyone in your team, one person's using sticky notes, another person is using a list app, another person's writing on paper, that's great. You know, it all works for them. But what happens is you don't have any visibility when you actually truly need it, right? Imagine if one of your coworkers is just writing down all their priorities on some random piece of paper, and then for some reason they leave, or they're out sick. And now suddenly you need to reprioritize those tasks, or you need to know what's important. How are you going to find out, right? You can't contact them, or you're trying but they're not able to, or there's just so many things that's happening. But inside Matrix, all that information is available. And so when you have a coworker leave, you can actually go to something like the search view, and you can select the person, right? So look how powerful this is. You can select the person and you can see, okay, actually, these are all the things that Eugenia is working on. Actually, what are all the things that Eugenia is working on that's in quadrant 1? And then what happens is if I need to reassign this, now that I'm in this view, I go to here, multiple select, I select all the tasks, and then I can mark the task as done, or I can reassign the task to another person. So within just a few clicks, I can actually reprioritize all the most important tasks that a coworker has to another person. And guess what? The other person can open each of those tasks and get the full history, right? That we mentioned earlier, everything from the conversations, the due dates, et cetera, et cetera. So I want you to keep that in mind as you use Matrix more on why it's valuable beyond today. Okay, so now I'm going to switch gear a little bit and talk about email management. So probably that's one of the top reasons why customers come to Matrix. Here I have my Outlook open. Now there's a couple of things you can do inside Outlook that's quite neat. As you can see, I actually have my full Matrix application directly inside Outlook. Here's Outlook for the web, but if you have Outlook for Windows, Outlook for Mac, you can actually do the exact same thing. And to do that, you simply click on down here, click Add Apps, and add Matrix. And then afterwards, you just pin it here on the left-hand side. So now you can actually have emails, calendar, people, contacts, and all that in Outlook, and then Matrix as part of your suite. But here's what happens when I'm in my email. So let's just say I have an email from a customer, and I'm not able to respond to it right now, right? I'm sure you get this all the time. You get an important email, you can't respond to it. So what do? A lot of you might flag the email, which is fine. If you have 5 flag emails, if you have 50 flag emails, then good luck, because now you don't know what to work on because it's just more and more emails. So instead with Matrix, what I'm able to do is I can open Matrix. Again, I can click on Add Apps here, and this is a separate application, so make sure you do this separately. But you add something called Turn Emails into Task. And now I can click on this and I can choose Prioritize Email. So let's see here. Prioritize email. For some reason, it's not loading. I reload Outlook here. Now that I click prioritize email, what happens is the right-hand side panel pops up and I can go and I can convert this email into a task. And as you can see, it takes the subject of the email as an item name. And in fact, I can change this as needed and I can choose what project it goes in. So imagine if you're in sales and you get an email that's a quote request, right? And there's a project associated with that, you can actually go ahead and choose that project. And then you can actually go and then choose what quadrant it goes in as well. So suddenly you have an email. Now you can put it in an appropriate project. You can put it in the appropriate quadrants. And then not only that, you can assign it to another person. And then you can say due next week. And then I click capture email. So as you can see, I'm able to take an email and not only do I not flag it and just make it as part of my much bigger inbox that's completely unmanaged, I can turn that email into a task. I can organize it. I can prioritize it. And I set the due date. And then guess what? I'm going to go and say, remind everyone weekly. Okay. So now instead of just setting a reminder for myself, I actually set a reminder for everyone who's on this item. So my coworker will get that recurring reminder to make sure that they answer this email. And that email is uploaded into the resources section as an EML file. So they can open that email and respond to it. And then they can respond to my item and say, it's done. Or they can upload a draft document or link to your OneDrive or your Office documents, etc., directly in here. And suddenly you have one central place as context. But imagine now the customer writes a follow-up and instead of responding to the thread, they actually write some new emails or there's some other emails that's relevant. Well, Matrix is the only software that I know that actually lets you attach an email to existing tasks and link it all together. So now I go back to that same view, but instead of prioritizing, I open Matrix and I get the same panel on the right-hand side, and I can just search for the appropriate Matrix action item, right? And then when I do, I can actually hover over that item and click attach. So now I might have an item in Matrix with multiple emails associated with it. I can have documents and links and resources, and it's assigned to the right people with the proper due dates and so on and so on. So as you can see with Matrix, I'm able to keep track of my emails. But here's another cool thing. Let's just say you get the email on a mobile device and you're on iPhone and you use Apple Mail. Well, guess what? Matrix actually has what's called the inbox. So I'm going to go ahead and open Matrix here. I can go to my inbox and then I can actually copy what's called my secret inbox address. So every single one of you have access to the secret inbox address. You simply click on this, you copy this address, and then when you are inside Outlook, or rather you're on your phone, right? You get an email, you see it on your phone, and now you say that I need to prioritize this email. Well, guess what? You can just take that email and then you forward it and then you do inbox right here and that's it. And you click send into Matrix. But Matrix uses, again, natural language for commands. So when I forward an email into my Matrix inbox, I can just say due in 2 weeks, remind me daily, and then I now can click send. And so now I can take an email that I see while I'm out and about and ensure that I won't forget it. When I flag the email, it's just not sufficient because I'm not able to go and set these recurring reminders or set these due dates or assign it to another person. So this is a really powerful capability. In fact, every project in Matrix has an email address. So what that means is you're able to go and build all sorts of rules around your systems in Matrix. So then if you get an email from a certain customer, it gets forwarded to an appropriate inbox inside Matrix. Or for me, for example, if I get an email from Microsoft, it gets forwarded into my Microsoft project. So now I have a central place to keep that information organized. Now I'm going to switch gear over to Microsoft Teams. As I mentioned, you don't need to use Microsoft Teams to actually use Matrix, but if you do, we actually have a lot of capabilities. The first is you should go again to apps and add Matrix, and when you do, you can pin it on the left-hand side, and now on inside Teams, you have access to the Matrix application. What's nice about this is that, again, you don't have to switch context, right? You don't have to open Matrix. You can instead access Matrix inside Teams directly, or again, inside Outlook directly, or you can install Matrix on the desktop. But there's a couple of features in Matrix that's very unique. Let's just say if you have some coworkers that you have a conversation with all the time. Well, you can actually add what's called the one-on-one view. And with the one-on-one view, I can actually select the person here and I can see all the tasks I have in common with them. So if you're a manager and you have 5 direct reports, and every time you have a meeting with the person, you want to know what have they been working on? What are the things that's blocking? What are the things that's not finished? What are the things we need to reprioritize? One of the things that you don't want to do is you don't want to go open your task management software, search through all the projects, find all the things they're doing, and then write down all that notes. You could spend an hour doing that easily every single week. Instead, you just go to Protomatrix, open the one-on-one view with that person, and Protomatrix automatically grabs every single task you have with that person across every single project. And then you can actually just sort and say, okay, let me see all the things that are due or overdue because they're red, so easy to see. And then what are the things that's been recently modified? That means they've touched this task recently. And then if they've made progress, you can actually see the progress on that task itself too. And so when I have a conversation with a direct report, I can actually just look at this information, go down the list, and be able to look at those tasks really easily. And guess what? If something's overdue or is no longer a priority, I can click on that task and then reprioritize it or change due dates or set a recurring reminders or star it, etc. And then when I need to come up with another task for that person, I simply click add share task. I can create the task here, right? So again, create a task. And then I can just say, I can use natural language again, due in 2 days. And when I add this task, I can it automatically assign to the other person and add you as a follower so you get an update. And I can even choose what project it goes in. So useful if you have a lot of meetings with individuals and you want to know what are the things they're working on and be able to go quickly create tasks. One of the things that I think, people tend to have problem with is you have a meeting and you talk about all these things and then no one writes it down. And so with Matrix, you can actually just create that real fast within Teams itself. And the way you add the one-on-one, by the way, all you have to do is click on this plus icon, choose Matrix, and then choose the one-on-one view. As you can see, when I'm in here, I can also add what's called a project view. So what that means is I can actually add a project from Protomatrix as a tab inside Teams as well. That means I can add it for my coworker, or I can add it in a channel. And so if you have a marketing department and you have a group of people in marketing, you can actually just add a marketing project in the channel. So anyone can go into the Teams and then be able to open up that marketing project without ever leaving Teams itself. There's a couple of other things. Matrix has what's called a chat bot. So the chat bot actually sends you those notifications. So you remember how we talked about those recurring reminders or the due dates? Oh, check this out. I just got a notification for a reminder for a task that I said remind me weekly. I'm able to get those reminders and it helps me have all these tasks as top of mind. But Matrix actually allows me to interact with this as well. So I can say, what do I need to work on today? And now I'm typing a literal natural language question mark or a question, right? And so when I type this to the chat bot, it actually processes it using natural language and actually respond to me and tell me what are the things I need to work on. In this particular case, I don't have anything that's due today, but if I had multiple tasks, the system will tell me what I have to do. And then not only that, I can actually click on view prompts and you can see how I can actually choose some of the potential questions to ask. But other than that, Matrix actually let me interact with it. And you could even ask it to create tasks for you just by interacting with the chatbot. Okay, there's a couple of other things, which is when you're in a conversation with somebody in Teams, you can actually also click on the chat here. I'm sorry, you can click on the conversation itself and choose create Matrix. And so that's very, very easy to do. And then that is just a way for you to not have to open the software. That's the whole point of all of this is that, Matrix works wherever it is that you want to work, as opposed to requiring you to open up the software just to create the task. Okay, there's many, many other capabilities inside Teams that I'm not going into, but if you're interested, be sure to check out the other webinars. But everything from workflow, Matrix also integrate with Microsoft Copilot, which is their AI. So then you can ask Copilot what are things you're working on, and Matrix will actually get surface up in there. And then, of course, we also have integrations with what I called Edge. And so here I have Microsoft Edge. I can actually install this. And so when I'm browsing any website, I can actually click on Matrix and create a task directly from that website. So what that means is that, I'm on SharePoint, or I'm in some CRM system, and I need to create a task from that. I can actually just use the Edge and Chrome extension to create that task. Okay, I'm going to go back to Matrix here real quick and show you a couple of other things as we wrap this up. When we talk about notifications and all that, no, that's what's called the home view, is where you start your day. So when you use Matrix, this is typically where, when you open Matrix, it'll take you to this view. And what this shows you is actually all the things that requires your attentions, and that's the alerts right here, right? So these are tasks where someone assigned you something, or a due date trigger, or a reminder trigger, etc. And so, when I start my day, I look at the alerts here to see if there's anything that's important to me. I can click on that, open the task, I can respond to it, I can mark it as done, etc. And so you see how, imagine if I got that task done, I can just mark it as completed right here. But once in a while, you might just want to clear all these notifications, so you can clear everything. So for example, clear everything older than a day. So now these are only things that are relevant to me within the last 24 hours. And then if I have those recurring reminders, it'll keep on popping up here, right? So you know how when you go on vacation, you might have so many things that you've sort of had forgotten, or you haven't looked at Matrix in a while. You may have a lot of things that's on your plate. Well, it's okay. You can clear those notifications, and then those recurring reminders will trigger again. But also, I can go to the agenda, and the agenda tells me the things that are happening within this week. So for example, what's happening today, what's happening tomorrow, you can see all the various tasks here. And then I can also go to my items to see all the tasks that I have that's relevant to me. So again, this is one place where I can actually just get started, and it aggregates all the information across all of Matrix. And I'm able to create tasks directly from here. And then when I need to make a bulk update, I can actually just click on this thing called multi-selection, and I can select multiple items, right? So again, I might have multiple items, and then I can change that. And then now I can change the due date, change the owner, export a CSV. So maybe you need to export in an Excel file. So Matrix gives you all sorts of ways to work with the data that you have. So the export of CSV is pretty useful, because then, sometimes you just want a list of all the things you're supposed to work on that you to send to somebody, or you can also import things as well from into Matrix from CSV. So that's the home view. So that's where you get started. I'm going to go back to the project creation one more time to show you a couple of other things. When you click on create project in Matrix, you actually have a couple of options. That blank project was what I showed you, but also you can actually use our AI to generate goals for you. So if you type in a goal, Matrix will create action items for you, or you can actually build your own template inside Matrix, and you can choose from one of those templates. So as your organization or your team uses Matrix more, you can actually build up processes within Matrix, set those due dates, and then when you choose a project from a template, what happens is that Matrix will let you choose the starting date, and then it'll create all those due dates for you automatically. So it's actually a very powerful way to save you time and effort, especially if you have a lot of recurring tasks. There's many other ways to look at your data, but that's all you need to worry about today. The last view that I want to show you is what's called our workload management. So if you're a manager, this is one other thing that's useful in Matrix, just to be able to see the workload of your coworkers. Okay, with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump back to the presentation here. Hopefully, you have a good sense of what's possible inside Matrix. As I mentioned, you don't have to use all those features. You remember what I said, just create a project for your personal task, create a project for your team priorities, and then invite the appropriate people, right? And then make sure they create the task and set those due dates and recurring reminders. That's it. That's all you have to do to get started. But if you do use Microsoft Teams and Outlook, then make sure that you add Matrix to those applications. Create a project that highlight your priorities. In fact, let's just say if you use Matrix, but no one else in your organization does, it's perfectly fine. Guess what? Create your priorities when you're in a meeting with your manager. Show them your Matrix and say, hey, by the way, these are the things that are on my plate. What do you think? Right? Just imagine that conversation, how useful that is, because you're able to be so explicit. So many times people will, talk about all these other things, but then, they didn't remember to talk about this other task. They didn't remember to talk about this other thing they wanted to do. And then the manager will assign them something new because They don't know what else is on their plate, and now you suddenly have a new task that may not be important, and so on and so on. You can imagine all those scenarios. So by using Party Matrix, you can make it so explicit. So even if you use Party Matrix by yourself, just presenting the matrix in a team environment or to other people is a powerful way to be more productive right away. Make sure you set those due dates and reminders. Can't emphasize that enough. My favorite features, and I think that's the most important features for you too. And then ask your coworkers to do the same exercise. Create their own personal priorities. And then if you have a team project, make sure that they write down their priorities for the team to see. And then sit down and compare a Party Matrix every week. That's it. That's all you have to do. And a couple of advice, when you start initially, use Party Matrix to track the high impact tasks. You don't have to track every single thing, but you can, by tracking the high impact tasks, I think you have a better sense of what's going on, how you're spending your time. Think of Party Matrix as a way to communicate your priorities to other people, right? That's a communication tool. The analogy I have is walking around the office and seeing a 4 quadrant float above everyone's head, right? Being able to go and see that is so helpful. Imagine being able to see the priority matrix above your manager's head, being able to look at that and see, oh, hey, those are the priorities that he or she consider to be most important this week, this month. Then use Party Matrix to manage your individual goals. I think that at the end of the day, your success is the most important. Doesn't matter, if the team uses Party Matrix, doesn't matter if the organization uses Party Matrix. It matters that you prioritize your tasks and you have a sense of what you need to work on that's most important. And then the last thing is set 1 hour each week, either at the beginning of the week or at the end of the week, to prioritize and reprioritize, right? The reprioritization is actually very important. You can write down all the things you have to do right now, but that's a snapshot. And then if you're spending an hour on Monday morning, moving things around and reprioritizing, say, you know what, this week, these are things I need to focus on. And then being able to do that and communicate to the relevant stakeholders what your priorities are will be extremely helpful. What success should look like on a personal level, make sure that you check Party Matrix every week. You have one central place to track your priorities. At the team level, just having that team project so then anyone can go in and see the priorities right now, right? You don't have to call a meeting just to talk about priorities. And then if you do a lot of emails management, make sure you do use those extensions to prioritize your emails and then assigning the emails, setting due dates to those emails, and then being able to see everyone's priorities whenever you need to. Okay, with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you.